what is most innate to us is our type and our subtype. What's then the next most comfortable place is our wings. But you're right, the lines are harder to access and it takes awareness. So if you have no awareness, you're probably not going to access the lines. You're going to just, so to me, that's part of the value of the Enneagram, is that we can bring things to our awareness. And when we have awareness, then we have the opportunity to choose. Otherwise, we're acting out of pattern behavior and we're going to do what they always say, get what you always got.
This season on the Living Out Love podcast, we are focusing on you, who you are, what motivates you, what you're here to contribute, and how you can expand. We'll be utilizing my leadership skills and spiritual connection, diving deep into the Enneagram and astrology. Listen every week to become intimately aware of yourself. Only then can you heal and grow. Let's get to work, loves. Well, hello, loves. Welcome back to the podcast. I am always thrilled to be here, but I'm especially thrilled to be here for two reasons. A, my voice is finally getting better. And B, I have two special guests this time. It's my first episode to have two guests. And we are talking about the Enneagram. If you're new to the podcast or new to the Enneagram, last season we did 3 different episodes with my mom, Stephanie Foy, where we talked about the Enneagram. She gave me some Enneagram coaching. She and I did a joint coaching. So you can check out those episodes. Links are in the show notes. But today I'm excited to invite my dad, Dana Foy, who is now also a certified Enneagram practitioner. So Dad, welcome to the show. And why don't you tell us, about who you are and your journey with the Enneagram?
Oh, my name is Dana Foy. I am 67 years old, and I had my Enneagram questionnaire in December 2018. And when I received that, it was so helpful. It enlightened to me on why I am the way I am. I act the way I do in crowds. It explained to me all my life I had felt awkward and uncomfortable in social situations. So after taking that questionnaire, I understood why I am the way I am. It has helped me go forward. It's given me some tools where I'm now more comfortable around people and just going around the world. I experience life with more ease and grace.
Mm. And what made you want to pursue a certification in the Enneagram?
It was just really helpful to me, and I wanted to learn more. And then as I talked to people about it, they wanted to learn more. And as they got involved, they had the same experience I had. They felt relieved, they understood themselves better. Also, the same experience I have now that I understand how the Enneagram works, the different types of personalities people have, and the vices and virtues of each. I now understand people better. I have more compassion and empathy, and it just helps me be more mature, have patience with people, and get along with them better.
Mm. So you're hoping to share the experience that you had. You're hoping to share that with others.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And I'm getting the kind of feedback from folks that it is helping them as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Mom, before I invite you in to talk, and just audience, so you'll know, I'm going to go back and forth between Mom and Dad and Dana and Stephanie, just depending on the context. But I wanted to explain why we're doing this introduction episode. So in the first episode of the season of the podcast, I talked about how we're going to be going into each number individually. But before we do that, I wanted to have this introduction episode because I think a lot of people that are familiar with the Enneagram think, okay, I get my number. I'm the compassionate helper. Okay, great. And they don't realize the amount of depth that the Enneagram has. And so that's why I wanted to do this overview so that we could kind of explain the depth of the Enneagram and the different functionalities, the different lenses with which the Enneagram works. And then that will set all of us up better. So when we do the individual numbers, that people will be more prepared. So, Mom, Stephanie Foy, why don't you just tell us briefly what is the Enneagram number? Like when people say, "Oh, I'm a 2" or "I'm a 7," what does that mean?
Okay, so your number is your, what we would call as your type or your personality profile. And it's your base type. And it addresses how you view the world. What are your vices? What are your virtues? And it sort of centers you in what is it that you're to bring to the world, maybe in this lifetime? What is it you're to learn in this lifetime? And I say lifetime specifically because I think, I don't know what's what, but for this round, this is what you're doing. And what we know about type is it doesn't change. Now, you may grow and mature in your expression of type, but your type is the same from the time, you develop a personality until you're no longer here. So type is your number, and that's your baseline for expression of the Enneagram.
Okay. And so then like the first immediate layer of the Enneagram that is the easiest to see visually, and we'll have the image up on the screen for those of you that are on YouTube. And if you're not on YouTube, you can find it on my website. But the first thing that's the easiest to see is the wings. So
Right.
why don't somebody tell us what the wings are?
Okay, so could I step back?
Yeah.
Because the way I think about the Enneagram and the value of its as a tool for personal transformation is to start with center and move out. So the center is your type. So we want to go deep in type first. Really understand your specific number, 1, 2 through 9. Then the second layer of that, before we get to wings, is the subtypes, because that flavors your type. It addresses your instinct, your desire, your motivation. So couple that with your worldview, how you view the world, what's yours to accomplish in the world. Now you have an expression of how you're going to go about doing that. So there's 3 subtypes: the SP, the SX, and the SO. The SP is self-preservation. So those people are tendency to interact and view the world through, how do I show up? How do I get what I need to be okay in the world? And it's not just a selfish view, because their perception is people who think, okay, if I handle myself, then other people will handle themselves and we'll all get along fine. So that's SP. SX folks, their focus is on relationship, and they're going to do their life, their work through the expression in relationship, and relationship is key. So it's that one-to-one. It is called SX because it was originally called sexual or sensual type, because it really is about making those very intimate connections with one other person. And in some cases, it's not just one person in your whole lifetime, but serial one-to-one connections. So those SX types are always going to be looking to express their profile and use their self in relationship. Now, the SO people, those are called socials. And those folks are looking to express their type in groups. So in a group setting, and some people call them, it's the herd instinct. So they tend to view things from a more, what we might think of as a macro level. So they're looking to see how's an organization working, or how is a community working, or so they tend to sort of look at bigger scope and how the bigger intricacies and parts work. So how do they express themselves in a large group? So we really want to look, to me, the subtypes are an opportunity to see, how is it that I'm working through my type with my motivation, with my instinct to show up in the world. So that's the first thing. So before we get to wings, it's like, let's focus on go deeper in type, and then we go out to wings.
Well, and that makes sense. In our family, we have 3 twos.
Yes,
and
we
the
do.
3 of us are all 3 different subtypes, and you can see how that plays out differently between the 3 of us. It's an interesting.
Exactly.
So I want to go back to what you said before that. You said identifying your type, and I don't remember if you said head, heart, gut, or thinking, feeling, doing. Like that was the initial. What is that called, and how does that?
Right.
Yeah.
So what we call that your 3 centers of intelligence. So just like we would think of. So to me, the Enneagram is a very holistic tool because it's looking at how you express yourself in mind, body, and spirit, your feelings. So we look at each of those elements, and some centers are centered more, some profile types. So 8, 9s, and 1s, they're in what we call the gut triad. So they're in the body triad. The 2s, 3s, and 4s are in the feeling triad, and 5, 6, and 7 are in the thinking triad. So each of those has a dominant influence in terms of how those folks interact in the world. We also have emotions that are tied to each of those triads. So the 8-9-1 triad, the gut triad, their typical emotion, their first emotion, the reactionary emotion, is anger. And how they express anger shows up differently depending upon their type. The feeling triad, the 2s, 3s, and 4s, they go into shame. Shame is their first sort of typical reaction and what they're looking to sort of mitigate in their lives. And then the thinking triad, the 5, 6, and 7s, their gut emotion is fear. So they're looking to manage and mitigate fear across their lifetime. So each of those, and that's not to say that we don't all have a very rich emotional life. We do, but that's just a way to begin to understand how each of the triads shows up in terms of their emotional stance and their interactions.
So I'm curious, and Dad, maybe you'll have something to say this, maybe you won't, but in just knowing your own dominant center. So like as a 9, your dominant center was the gut. And then your dominant emotion was anger. So knowing your own dominant center, and then also having the reflection that other numbers have different, or other types have different dominant centers. How has that information in and of itself, how has it either been helpful for you, or why is it helpful for us to have in general?
Well, since I know my gut emotion is fear, and also I'm a very emotional person, that I know when I go into a situation where I'm not conscious, and I know that I'm going to walk in fear, and my emotions are going to be in control of whatever I'm deciding to do, what not to do. Well, when you take the IEQ9 test, it'll show you what percentage or how much you have available that you're using up in the 3 different triads. There's the centers of intelligence, which Stephanie spoke of. I think along the centers of expression. That's where I come from. And that's thinking, feeling, and acting. And I'm a big feeler, secondary thinker, third part acting. So when I get in stress and I need to get myself out of it, I use the centers of expression most of the time. What I need to do is take action. I'm a 9. We tend to move slowly, think a lot, ruminate a lot, and not take action in a timely fashion. So I know when I'm going in, if I'm under stress, that I'm probably thinking and feeling, mostly feeling, sometimes mostly thinking, and not taking a lot of action. My action is suppressed. So once you know your type and you're familiar with it, you know how to use those things in your favor. What do I need to change? How can I be different? What do I need to do?
So you said that Stephanie said she referenced centers of intelligence, and you referenced centers of expression.
Right.
Are those the same in terms of the 8-9-1 would have the same center of expression, the 2-3-4?
No,
not necessarily.
Okay.
When you take the IEQ9 test, you'll find that different people, based upon their number, their type, and how they live out how their life playouts, will be concentrated in one of the triads more than the other. When you're one piece of the triad more than the other.
So let me just add, Amy, that
Sure.
IEQ9 added a whole element in addition to the typing profile. So centers of intelligence is what we would consider sort of baseline Enneagram. Centers
Right.
of expression is an added measure that's added by IEQ9 that gives a more complex view of the person. So
Okay.
it is true what Dad was saying, is that not all nines will have high expression in the body center. But like for him, he has high expression in the feeling center, second in thinking, third in body.
Mhm.
So,
okay. That's helpful because I just wanted to be clear
right.
for people listening that if you just go take an Enneagram quiz somewhere and you find out your number, that will tell you your center of intelligence based on your number, but it's not going to tell you your center of expression.
Exactly. Well, and let
Okay.
me, if I can, take just a
Yeah.
second and address that whole concept about, can you go out there and take an Enneagram test? Yes, you can. They're everywhere. You just search Enneagram on the website and, on Google, you will find hundreds. But here's the thing. Most of them have little scientific research behind them. And some research suggests that so IEQ9 averages at about 96% validity, reliability, in other words, accuracy. It's going to hit people 96% of the time. So 4 out of 100 might mistype, but mostly if you answer honestly and you really answer how you show up in your own life, it's going to give you the right. The next closest one, by our understanding and scientific, what's been proven, is at about 57%. So what you're getting out there on the internet might or might not be right because there's not much science behind it.
Right.
Whereas the IEQ9, the company has invested a lot of money and continues to invest a lot in research and continuing to validate the questionnaire. And so instead of just taking a questionnaire that maybe, 30 to 60 questions, the IEQ9 is made up of a question bank of over 1,200 questions. And you can think of it like a funnel, that you start out with a lot of questions and you answer a few and then it funnels you down and you answer a few more and it funnels you down. So that's how they get to having such accurate expressions of people's types.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a sense of the types. Your number, it doesn't change. And we have a sense of the subtypes. So within your number, you might be SO social, SX the one-to-one, and SP the self-pres.
Mm-hmm.
And then within all of that, we have an understanding of our types have a center of intelligence. And within that, as individuals, we have our own centers of expression.
Sure.
So now I know myself pretty well.
Okay.
What do I learn next?
So I like to think of it as going from center to circumference. So we're going to build out. So our next step is to look at wings, because that's the next. If you look at the graphic of the circle, the wings are the two numbers on either side of your number. So as a 2, your wings will be 1 and 3. As a 3, my wings are 2 and 4. So you can think about that. So that's relatively close. You share some traits with your wings, but there's enough distinction that they're a 1 and you're a 2. And so, but you have relatively easy access to those numbers. And we do 2 wings. Now, in the Enneagram community, you'll hear people talk about, oh, I'm a 3 with a 4 wing. Well, birds that just have 1 wing fly in circles. We don't want to be people that fly in circles. So we want to have both wings now, but it's like our hands. One may be dominant. Most people are right-handed or left-handed, and then their second one is kind of secondary. So we think about wings that we can typically have one that may be dominant, but there's lots of opportunity for us to be ambi-winged, ambidextrous. So we want to learn to use and access both wings. So the wings then are opportunities for us to look to see, okay, we've got a situation and maybe my normal way of being is not going to work, or I need to flex. I need to show up a little differently, or I'm encountering a problem. I've got a problem in a relationship and I need to shift it. So looking at our wings is an opportunity to say, okay, how might this influence me? As a 2, you might think, okay, what's a 1? Strict perfectionist. They're going to have a lot of attention to detail. They're going to have a lot of attention to doing the right thing, having, they're being very principled, very value centered. That's what a 1 brings. 3 brings lots of action. They have, their tasks. They're people who like to get things done. So you can think about, okay, what is it that I need in this moment? And how might I lean on or draw from my wings to move me in the direction that I'd like to go?
Okay. So it feels to me like the wings could also be a bit of a personality thing. Like I'm a 2, and if I go more 3, I'd have a different personality than if I went more 1.
So typically your personality is going to be the same. It's just how you want to apply that, how you want to leverage your personality to achieve the outcomes, your aims in life. Whether it's, let me think of an example. Okay. So on Thursday morning, I had an opportunity to go with a woman who I don't know her type, but we had an activity, a thing we needed to do together. Well, I would have, as a 3, I would have just gone in there, and 3s make decisions fast. There's no reason to pussyfoot around. Just get in there, get the work done, get out. I probably would have approached that in that way. But my wisdom said, once I was kind of in the situation and I didn't know this woman real well, I was like, oh, she's not going to move fast. And so I need to slow my roll down, so I needed to lean into 2. I needed to lean into that considerate helper and shift my role out of leader, take charge, into slow the roll, let her be in charge, attend to the relationship, attend to her feelings, what was important to her, and help her have what we needed to help her get done what we needed to get done.
Okay. And so because it's a wing, like you're going to have an easier time going to considerate helper than you would go to, let's say 6, which was, I forgot what 6 is called.
6 is the loyal skeptic.
Yeah. So because 6 is not a wing of your 3, that would be way harder for you to get to than the 2 or the 4.
Right.
Okay. So it's almost like it gives us this spectrum of behavior or of motivation with which that we can play on.
Right. This
I'd like to say
latitude in our behavior.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So I'm a 9 and I'm surrounded by 1 and 8. Actually, I'm a composite of all those 3. And 9 is dominant. I'm very heavy 9. But since I'm a composite of those, all the vices and virtues of my wings are easy for me to identify with and easy for me to think about and easy for me to do because they're the next 2 strongest parts of me. So that's why it's so easy to be conscious and decide like Stephanie did. I need to throw some 2 in here. And it's easy to grab onto that. It's sort of a natural thing to do.
Yeah. You bring up a point I was gonna ask too, because when I was reading just the different numbers, the 1, I don't relate to the 1 at all. But when I read the shadow stuff and like the weaknesses of the 1, I was like, well, I relate to all of those, So that's interesting that it's the composite and that the vices and the virtues sort of still apply in some regard. Yes, Mom.
Right. Just a step out. So back to my Thursday example. So in thinking about that, I thought, okay, there's 2 things here I need to draw on. I want to go back to. I want to draw on the subtype SX because this is a one-to-one relationship. So my SP, I need to let it sort of fade back a little bit and move more towards SX, the subtype SX, coupled with the type 2 energy. Now I could, one, be peaceful because I could just not be anxious about trying to get things done, which would be my normal 3. Like, let's hurry up, get this done.
Mm-hmm.
So moving into SX and leaning into 2, now it makes me in a better position to engage with this person. And this is a person that I hope I'll have a long, healthy relationship with. So I didn't want to get started on the wrong foot.
Right. Okay. So we've already covered a lot of ground. We got our types, we got our dominant centers, our centers of expressions, we got our subtypes. Now we got our wings. Where do we go next?
Okay, so the last step.
Dad, did you want to add something?
Sorry.
Okay, so the next step are the lines. And when you have the Enneagram graph in front of you, the logo, you'll see that there are lines going from each number, one going away, one going across. It's Enneagrams in 3, so I'm a 9, so my lines go to 6 and to 3. And it takes a little more work for me to access the 3 and the 6 because they're not part of my composite number. And pretty much the numbers on your line are describing behaviors opposite of what you typically do in your dominant number. So a 9, we are playfully described as meditating elephants. We move slowly about the world, take our time making the decision. And some people say we procrastinate. I call it allowing. And sometimes the rest of the world can't wait on me allowing something to happen. So the 3 is one of my lines, and that is the competitive achiever. So if I'm under stress and need to get something done, I can go to my 3. That's an easy release point. 3s are competitive achievers. 3s are action oriented. Like I said earlier, I'm very emotional. Well, 3s are very action oriented. They're going to get the stuff done, and feelings are sexual. So if I've got something that I need to get work done in a hurry, I can pull up the 3 and see how they are, and I can access that. Now I'm really good at that because I practice. Now it comes time to do a bigger project. That's where I go to my 6, the loyal skeptic. One of the things that 6s have is courage. The 6, the loyal skeptic, one of the things they do is they manage fear. So it takes courage to face fear and come up with processes and ways to mitigate it. So when there's something that I'm kind of afraid to do, I'm typically a shy guy and don't normally speak in front of groups. So when it comes time for me to say, you know what, I've got to speak, I can go to my 6 and I can realize that what's in the 6 is within me, and I can find the courage. And I can go to a 3 and I can get the energy to do what I need to do to when I find the courage to get the work that I need to get done to show up and be bigger than the 9 that I am. So I hope that comes across as accurate. Stephanie, what do you think? You want to add to that?
No, I would just say it's true that, so the lines represent typically where you go under stress, like, oh, I'm under stress and this is not working for me. I need to do something else. So there's a stress point and there's a release point. And also I think that, just like you were talking about earlier, how the wings are closer to our number and the lines are, like opposite or on the other side or connected to us, but in a different way. So they're typically not as easy to access, but they're places that when we move in that direction, when we access that part, then it can yield big benefits, because oftentimes that's the place where, like Dad said, the 3 is almost like opposite of the 9. So that's a stretch point. Like if you want to really grow yourself, moving into the lines is an opportunity that's going to take you like to the next level. So that's why I say it's like we've built type, we've added subtype, we've gone to wings. Now we're a step further out is going to the lines. So you as a 2, your lines are to 8 and to 4. So 2s, as a considerate helper, it's a stretch to think about being an active controller. Doesn't that feel like opposite energy?
Uh-huh.
But on the other hand, if you are in that position where you need that, I'm thinking about, okay, you're chaperoning, the kindergartners to the livestock show, probably a little 8 energy would be good. Like they need a little controlling.
Uh-huh.
They don't need helpers. They don't be having the helping themselves. So a little 8 energy would be good, because remember what 8s bring is they bring protective energy. They bring control. And in some cases, it could be like everything else. It could be low side, but it could be high side. And that high side is protection. The high side is watching out for problems and addressing problems before they occur. So that's high. It's 8 energy, and it feels very counter to 2, but there's opportunity in it for 2. Mm-hmm. Then the other side, the other line for 2 is the 4, which is the intense creative. So that's an outlet for 2s, which is to move into their creativity, and that sort of can help regenerate them. So having some sort of anyway, so yeah, lines.
Well, and I think I'm thinking back to me historically, and you both know me, so I'm thinking of me in college and post-college and a relationship that I was in this whole season of life. And had I known the Enneagram, maybe I would have done it differently. But what I think I did to manage what was a hard season is I really leaned into 4, because that was comfortable for me.
Right.
Where perhaps I would have been better served had I leaned into 8, but that felt like a bigger stretch.
Yes.
And so what you said earlier that I just want to repeat is like, when you do it well, like these are the lines, should you choose to accept, and when you do it well, because my suspicion just based on my own history is that you can choose not to take the stretch.
Sure.
You could choose to bury your head in the release, or just keep trying to swim on the wings. It's not like the stretch is this automatic, intuitive thing. Even for me, it's not an intuitive place to go.
Right.
And so I'm so curious. Like, I'm like, if I had known the Enneagram, if I had an Enneagram coach back then, like what might I have done differently?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely correct. So what is most innate to us is our type and our subtype. What's then the next most comfortable place is our wings. But you're right. The lines are harder to access, and it takes awareness. So if you have no awareness, you're probably not going to access the lines. You're going to so to me, that's part of the value of the Enneagram, is that we can bring things to our awareness. And when we have awareness, then we have the opportunity to choose. Otherwise, we're acting out of pattern behavior, and we're going to do what they always say, get what you always got.
It takes practice. The more you practice, the easier it gets. And you can practice ahead of time. If you know you're going into a situation and I'm going to have this truckload of kids at the rodeo, it's not something you typically do every day. You can get ahead of it. Say, how's this going to be? Particularly if you're going a big jump from, you're by yourself and you don't have kids around, you're not responsible for, and all of a sudden you've got 20 kids and you got to keep your eye on them. So you can practice and get ahead of it and be conscious about it. That's how you get better at it.
Yeah.
And then I'm also of the opinion, once you get practiced at it and you use it, it'll become natural. It'll just come out of you. Particularly if it's a subtype change or something you get from the wings. The lines, that can be easier once. Like going to the 3 is easy for me because I've done it so many times. In fact, I get up and I have a 3 list for myself. This is my 3-ness today. That's what I want to do, and I can be pretty good at getting things done. Now, the courage part, I'm still having to remember that I'm a brave guy, and I've done many scary things in my life, and I can keep doing them again. I just need to practice that too.
I love that you have a 3 list.
Oh, yeah.
That's such a great idea.
In fact, I have a name for myself when I'm doing my 3 list. I call myself Trey. I go from being a human elephant, a meditating elephant, to Trey. And then I was talking to another gentleman who is an Enneagram practitioner, and we were talking about, me having courage and going to 6. And he said that Richard Rohr said that Jesus was a 6. It took an incredible amount of courage to be Jesus. And he said, now, Dana, if you're going to call yourself Trey when you're working on your Trey list, you can just call yourself Jesus when you're working on your 6 list. I'm not quite ready to do that yet, but I so Suzanne Stabile, she's known as the godmother of the Enneagram. She has her own situation, and she's a practitioner of Richard Rohr's, been at it for decades. And one of the things that we learned from her is she says, if you can name something, you can fix it. So if you can name, you can go down to the list of vices and virtues of your core type, your wings, your subtypes, and what's on your lines, and figure out what do I need for this situation. So for me, when I consciously call myself Trey, I know I'm up to being busy. I'm up to getting things done. And I'm going to have my emotions on the side. I'll deal with them later. And then, I'm not quite ready to call myself Jesus, but I just the whole Jesus thing. I don't think I'm quite ready to spell my name, Jesus, but I'll come up with a name like that. And I just call it, and I can bring it forth. If I name it, I have a better chance of doing it.
I love that idea. We all need to name these kind of alter egos for ourselves.
Okay, so I'll give you one more, and I'll let everybody else talk. So 1 is one of my wings and the ones are strict perfectionists, and they are a harsh critic primarily on themselves. Well, I have that. I have a harsh critic with me, so I just named him Ralph. When Ralph is criticizing me and getting on me, and Ralph can be brutal. Oh my God, Ralph wakes me up in the middle of the night when I'm asleep and gets on me. I don't even see it coming. You and I
share that one.
So I just tell Ralph, will you just shut up? You and I can discuss later. Or, Ralph, I don't need you now. Okay, I'm sleepy. I mean, you have a name for it, and you come up with a strategy to deal with it. And Ralph will be quiet when I remember to tell him it's time to sleep. We can deal with you tomorrow. So it's just games that we play that work. It works for me to have a name for things.
That's beautiful. So for me as a 2, with my stretch being 8 and completely not intuitive at all, I have a relationship with a person that's an 8 that I didn't understand. I just really struggled to understand and have connection with, because it's so different than my 2-ness. And so then learning that person was an 8 was so helpful for my relationship with them, but B, then it gave me an avatar of oh, now I have this example of how to be an 8, and I'm not going to do it the way they do it. I'm going to do it the way I do it. But it was not only did it help me heal my relationship with that person, but it gave me a role model. So that's the other thing that I love about the Enneagram, and I love about just in general, the culture having a shared vocabulary. You know what I mean? Yeah. That we have this shared vocabulary. Oh, I'm a 7, or I'm a 2, blah, blah, blah. That not only is it helping us on the one-to-one, on the individual reflection level, but then it gives us these avenues to rewrite our stories within our relationships. And it gives us these avenues. For me, it's a lot about forgiveness, and a lot of times just forgiving my own expectation. I had this expectation that somebody would be a 2 and they're not, and I had to forgive it, and having the context of what they are is so helpful.
Right. We just had that study with, on the book on the 4 agreements, and it's don't take things personally. It's once you have the language of the Enneagram, you don't have to think that because a person did a certain thing or didn't do a certain thing, that it was for you or against you, right. Because the truth is it probably wasn't. It was probably just their type being their type. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have to think, they were out to get me, or that it was personal, because it probably wasn't. It was probably just them being what they were.
Yeah.
It also opens up, I think, Amy, you were talking about language, is the opportunity for people to create more clarity in their relationships, because you can speak to a person like, it's not you that's not, it's not just you personally. It's like people who are this way tend to do these things. And so, I'm just thinking about it in terms of teams and how in organizations, we don't necessarily have to ascribe behavior to the person, but it is to the type. And then that sort of gives it a bigger context, and it makes it where people, I think, can hear things differently than to be put personally on the defensive.
Give me an example of that, please.
Okay. So fives want to go deep in information, but that also means they don't make decisions fast. So someone who was expecting somebody to turn around something on a project and say, okay, here's where I think we need to go. Well, if they were applying a 3 mindset, they would think they should have that decision quick. But if they understood the person was a 5, they could understand, oh, I have to give this person more time. They have to have opportunity to get the data. And then we can set a reasonable timeline. Otherwise, I might ascribe to them that they're either just lazy, or they don't care about the project, or it's not a priority with them. You see how I could have ascribed my own 3 orientation to something that was not
right
their orientation. So once I understood their orientation, instead of having the conversation like, well, you just don't think this project is a priority, and why didn't you get that decision to me? Instead, I can say, oh, okay, wait a minute. That may or may not be the case. So now I can have a conversation with this person who's a 5 to say, understand what's a reasonable time frame for us to have a decision.
Gotcha. Okay. You said organizations, and I was just curious because as a family that we all have this knowledge, sometimes we'll come around the kitchen island and one of us will be like, oh God, I'm in my 2, and we'll all just know what it means and be able to hold space for one another. So I was curious if that dynamic is what you were referencing within organizations, because I know you've done Enneagram teamwork.
It can be if people do enough work with it and work with it as a team, it can definitely open that space and help people have space for one another in a different way.
Okay. Yeah, that's inspiring. So we've covered a lot so far. We've done wings and stretch and release, and we've done a lot. Where do we go from here? I have my questions, but since you guys are the teachers, where do we go next?
I think
Name something. Go ahead.
Okay.
I think to me, to me now it just becomes application every day. So here's what I talk about. The Enneagram is like a tool. I think about it like a yard spade. I can either dig out weeds, or I can plant flowers, or I can lay that tool in my shed or in my garage and not see it again until, I happen to pass by it. So to me, the Enneagram is just like that. It's a good tool. If you use it every day, if you are aware and you bring it to your experiences and your relationships, it can help you. If you do it once, you go, oh, I have my Enneagram type. I got my type. And then you lay it on the shelf somewhere, it's not going to do you much good. So to me, it's how do you continue to work with it? How do you continue to apply it? And then if you're really interested, there's tons of information out there. There's some great podcasts. There's other great books. You can explore all kinds of things related to the Enneagram and to self-exploration, but you have to be interested in it.
Yeah. So there's 2 questions that I just personally have. I don't know how valuable they are, but in the IEQ 9 version of the Enneagram, there's the 3 subtypes. I know that's not just specific to IEQ 9, but there's also a thing called counter type.
Right.
Can you talk about what that is, what that means?
So the IEQ 9 is the only online test out there that identifies subtypes as far as we know.
Okay.
So counter type is within each type. So each type, there's 3 subtypes. So we've got 27 altogether. But for each type, one of the subtypes causes you to be counter to that type, not counter to the other subtypes, just counter to type. It causes you to go counter.
Okay.
So for instance, I am a counter type 3. So most 3s want, because we're competitive achievers, we want to achieve. And as a SX or an SO type, most 3s also want public recognition. They want to be on stage. They want to be publicly recognized. They wouldn't mind being famous. As a self-preservation 3, I'm counter type. I don't care about that. My orientation to success is an inward measure. I'm only looking at, did I make my own goals? And whether I'm acknowledged or not is not important. In some ways, I'd rather almost not be acknowledged. So I'm counter type. So type is achiever. I still have that motivation, but how it shows up out in the world is slightly different than the SX or the SO type.
So I have a hypothesis about counter type. My hypothesis is there might be people out there who are a counter type to their number and thus either test incorrectly on a generic test or don't resonate with their number on a generic test because of the counter type.
It could be. And because at first when I read 3, I was like, oh, that's not me. But then realized, oh, it is me. It just, I show up differently. It's the influence of the subtype.
Yeah. Okay. I just think there's a lot of people out there that they feel very solid in their number. That like they read the book, they took a quiz or whatever, they feel very solid in their number. But because they haven't done the IEQ 9 or because they haven't really dove in deep into the other layers of that, there's just this whole world of knowledge and expansion that they're unaware of,
Sure.
And so it's been years since I first took the Enneagram on like a free online quiz, but I remember that I got 2 at the time, and I remember going, maybe, I guess, but then when I did the IEQ 9 and I read about the subtype, I was like, that could not be more true. That's 100%, and for me, it was counter type. And so that's why I'm kind of like, okay, I wonder if the counter type might throw it off sometimes for some people.
It could, but that's part of why the IEQ 9 is so accurate, is because they have included subtype and they're very clear about asking those questions that get people to their subtype. And it's part of what they tell us. And I'm not the researcher, so I can't speak to it, but that's what they tell us, is that's part of what gives it such a high degree of accuracy.
Yeah. The other thing, there's 2 other things I want to talk about. One, so Dad, you mentioned Suzanne Stabile earlier,
right?
As being the godmother of the grandmother or the godmother? Godmother of the Enneagram. She talks a lot about stances. And my understanding of stances is it's a combination of the dominant center and orientation to time. Is that correct?
Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Stephanie because she does a much thorough job of explaining this. Stephanie?
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah. So stances, you're right. It is about orientation to time, which I think is kind of unique to her in terms of, we don't really talk a lot about that in the IEQ 9. It's part of people's profile, but it's not a focus. And then also sort of how people get what they want in the world is what I think about. So in Suzanne's conversation, she talks about the aggressive stance, which are people that come from the 3, 7, and 8. Okay. And those people typically are oriented towards the future. And for the most part, they are feeling repressed. Now, take this with a grain of salt, because as we already talked about with the IEQ 9, we've got that centers of expression that gives a more detailed look. So that's sort of a gross generalization. But where I think stances are really helpful is to think about in terms of other people. We may or may not know their type, but we can listen for their language and we can listen for how they interact. And we could at least maybe put them in a stance. So the aggressive stance, the dependent stance, dependent being, let me think of this.
Is that 2s, 1s, and
1s, 2s, and
6?
1s, 2s, and 6s. Sorry. Yes. And they're called dependent, not because, and truthfully, all the wording of these stances is kind of, everybody goes, oh, that's terrible. I don't want to be dependent. But it's because
compliant?
they are referenced by other people. So they're dependent on other people. Their reference
going to react
is
to
outside
somebody.
themselves.
They're looking for a signal
Right.
from whoever they're talking to, so they know how to respond. So they're depending upon someone to initiate the conversation or initiate some action.
Gotcha.
Right. So, and those folks are oriented towards the present. So they have, and doesn't mean that they're, when we think of mindfulness practices, that they're actually present, but that's their orientation to time. So the current moment. And in their high side, in their redeemed side, they can be fully present with whatever thing is going on. Then we have
well, 1 second. So you said 3, 7s, 8s were feeling repressed. So 1, 2s, and 6s are thinking repressed?
Thinking repressed.
Okay.
And so isn't that weird? Because here's 6 and it's over there in the thinking quadrant. But what is the truth is that 6s are typically contradicted in their thinking. Should I do this? Should I do that? I can't. Should I? They're one foot in the other foot. Whereas the 2s are so emotionally available. So they're typically such high feeling. They're sort of in the feeling doing conundrum, and thinking is what gets left out.
Okay.
And then the 1s, they are they're acting and thinking. They're acting and doing. So they tend to also leave out thinking because that's their orientation. So 1, 2, 6, thinking repressed. But again, take that with a grain of salt if you're doing an IEQ 9, because we've got centers of expression. And then the last one is 4, 5s, and 9s, and they are tethered to the past, and they are doing or action repressed. The 4s don't want to take action because they're not sure that they can do it creatively enough. It has to be unique. And if they can't do it uniquely, then maybe they shouldn't do it all. 5s have a hard time taking action because there's never enough time to get enough data. There's one more data point. So they're going around in their thinking. They're caught in thinking, but less doing. So they go feeling to thinking, feeling to thinking. 4s go feeling to thinking. They start with feelings, go to thinking, leave out action. 9s are the contradicted. So they're kind of like the 6s are contradicted with thinking. They're contradicted with action. Should I take action? Should I not take action? This is so, and because their energy is lower, we all look at what's the cost to us. And so the action people that are action repressed look at what's it going to cost me. And so 9s is going to cost me some energy, and same with 5. So
I think the orientation to time, that was the one other thing that I wanted to talk about as being surprisingly helpful. Especially for me, like everything I know about Enneagram is predominantly through what I've learned personally. So for me, having to go to 8, having an understanding of the quote aggressive stance, but like that they're future oriented is really helpful, because I don't realize I'm not future oriented. Like there's times I think I think I'm thinking when I'm not thinking, but B, I think I'm planning for the future when I'm not. And so having that awareness of I need to stretch and go this direction is really helpful. So I just think orientation to time is also interesting from the relationship perspective.
Oh, for sure, because it's interesting in a couple that are in our Enneagram class. She's a 7 and he's a 5. And she shared recently that she had come up with an idea of something that they could do. Oh, we should do la la la. Very typical 7 energy. Oh, this is going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. And he says to her, why would we want to do that? And in that moment, she was like, oh, I got it. Because she's future and he's past. So there's no present here, first of all. And so there wasn't anything in his past that would suggest that the thing she was recommending was any relevance.
So this couple had been married for decades. And she said, for the first time, I really understand our relationship.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's the value of knowing behavior types, where they're coming from.
Yeah.
So yes, I think the orientation to time is a good, if nothing else, it's a good place to ask yourself in any kind of relationship, oh, are we coming at this from the same space? Type aside, even if we just looking at orientation to time.
Right.
Are we in the same place?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, towards relationships. I, for a long time, have thought I had the perfect marriage. People should want my marriage. We're perfect, right? And in a lot of ways we are. But I'm like, we're both 2s. And so there's a lot of wonderful things out there that exist for the human beings to step into that neither one of us are naturally good at. And so we can be, as parents and as people that want to have goals and get stuff done, we can struggle to do that because we're so similar and we have the same strengths and the same weaknesses. So I think that's the other interesting thing in terms of if you're wanting coaching or if you're wanting to figure out, in my lens of living out love, like how do I become the person that I'm called here to be? And what does that mean in the context of my relationship, in the context of my parenting? Like just having these understandings is so much more valuable than I think we would ever imagine if you're somebody that's just like found the Enneagram on Instagram.
Right. Well, it is, to me, at its most useful, it is this very complex and dynamic. It's a dynamic tool because it's going to grow and change with you as you change and grow. It's still available to bring you more insight, to bring you more wisdom. And to me, it's like I said, it could just be a learning, something you read about and, oh, that was interesting, and you move on. Or you can say, oh, this is really a fit for me, and I can see where it can help me in my own evolution, in my own attention to my growth and my soul's growth.
Yeah. I'm curious. So the Enneagram is based on sacred geometry. Well, it's not based on that, but at some point sacred geometry got introduced, and that's how we have the shape and the lines. With astrology, it's a wheel. And so everything goes around in a circle and one thing leads to the next. With the Enneagram, it's not quite a wheel because there's only 9 numbers. It's asymmetrical, but there's the sacred geometry of the lines. Mm-hmm. So my assumption is, but I'm curious if this is taught or not, or way off base. So for me, like the 2 goes to the 8, the 8 goes down to the 6 or whatever. Like, I'm wondering if your soul's evolution in the context of the Enneagram is, okay, I'm too heavy on 2. I need to go to 8. I master 8. And then I follow that line down. And if you just keep going around the shape of the lines, Like, would that be the way a soul would evolve, or did the lines like, is it more for this one lifetime, I guess, than for in the whole soul's overall pattern?
So I haven't heard anybody talk about going on the other people's lines.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's enough in a lifetime to just master your own. But
Right.
we also teach and know that we all have all 9 types as a person. But, what percentage I am an 8 is probably a whole lot less than I am as a 3, a 2, a 4, a 6, and a 9. Those are going to be easier for me to access. 5 is way out of my, like I don't have any. So some teachers, depending upon who you listen to, will tell you that it's enough just to handle these parts. Now, no, that might be an interesting theory that if you travel the line from 8 down to something else, but I don't know. Dana, you ever thought about that?
I agree with you. I think if you can just manage yourself in this lifetime, that's enough.
Okay.
That's plenty for me. And then once you get yourself kind of, I want to say, figured out or used to working with it, well, then you can take it a step further and work it with your spouse, your kids. One thing that I've always cautioned is, and I find it's true, it's very difficult to predict what somebody else's number is. Because they could be acting out in such a way that you may think this person is an 8 or a 1, but they may not be. They just may be acting that out, and their core number could be something else. I've been fooled a few times. I was so convinced somebody was a certain way. And then once they were tested and we visited, I got it. He's just under stress. So he's not acting like a 9 right now. I know what he's doing. I'm a 9. I have a 1 and an 8 wing. His 8 wing is working on it. So, but now that I know this person, I get it. He and I are very much alike. So you got to be careful when you're trying to guess somebody's number. I've been wrong more than I've been right. So I just give it up. I don't try.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think with typing people, I think, as we said earlier, with like stances and orientation to time, it's just helpful to have the frames of lenses. You know what I mean? Like, even if you don't have their type right, you can identify, oh, they're past oriented, or oh, they're doing oriented. Like, that seems to be enough.
At least it's a start. And
it's a start. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes that's enough just to make you have more compassion and make you more empathetic to the other person. And then to me, that's when, if we think about living out love, it's like, that's what love is, having space for other people to be who they are. And so to me, the Enneagram is a perfect tool to make space for other people. And therefore be loving, be more loving.
Okay, so you're going to have to help me say this, because sometimes vocabulary escapes someone who's emotional like me. But I also believe, and I believe firmly, the way to act out love on this planet is for you to do your Enneagram work. When you get your number, that's when the journey begins. That tells you, okay, so here's who I am. This is why I do this. And if I don't do anything about it, I'm going to continue being me over and over. And I'm going to relive this pattern until I pass. So the best thing I can do for myself on the planet is to say, I want to be the best version of me that I can be. And I can get up in the morning and I'm okay, I got to get Trey in gear. I got a lot I got to get done and make the list. And I'm kind of lazy. Sometimes I don't want to make the list. And sometimes, I can fool myself and say, well, I don't want to work on this really important thing, but I'm going to work on these other things. And at least I can say I'm doing something. So acting out love is becoming the best version of yourself. And the Enneagram can help you do that.
Absolutely. And the thing to me that's so helpful about the Enneagram that I haven't found anywhere else is it's like, it gives you the prescription. If you had asked me like what area I needed to grow in, I would not have told you I needed to become an 8. Like, that's the last thing I would have thought of. But then because the Enneagram said, hey, look, like, you need to try this thing over here, I was like, oh, that is a better version of me when I can incorporate that. But I never would have gotten there on my own, So to me, that absolutely is the benefit of the tool, is that it helps you to understand where it is you're called to go for your own growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited. So in this season, we're going to every, 3 to 5 weeks, I'm going to talk to one of you at a time. We're going to deep dive into one number and how that manifests in different subtypes and the wings. And I also want to talk a little bit about like, how do those numbers show up in relationship? Like for my 8 example earlier, I was reading about 8s and it said, if you don't hear from them for a while, don't take it personally. It's not that they aren't caring about you. It's just that like they're busy and they'll call you when it's on their list of things to get done. And it was so wild to me because my husband and I both are 2s, and we had this whole story about this 8 and what they thought and felt about us. And I had sort of kind of started to think, I bet we're wrong about that. We're probably wrong about that, but I couldn't identify why. And then when I read that, I was like, we were definitely wrong about that, And so having this understanding of how do those numbers show up in relationship? I know we won't get into all the weeds with all the numbers, but I'm hoping that we can start to dive in a little bit. And even without people taking the IQ9 or talking to an Enneagram coach, by the end of this season, I really feel like we're really going to help some people step into their expansion, maybe heal their stories, just have in general a better idea of how to live out love, how to heal their wounds and move towards their soul's greatest embodiment is another way I would say living out love. So Mom, Dad, Dana, Stephanie Foy, thank you for being here. Everybody listening, all the links are in the show notes. If you're curious about working with Foy and Associates, their website's in the show notes, and we'll see you next week, loves. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Living Out Love podcast. If this episode was helpful for you, there are 3 ways that you can share the love. You can send this episode to family, friend, neighbor, leave me a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, or comment and ask questions on YouTube. This season is meant to be interactive. Thanks again for your presence. I appreciate you being here. Talk to you next week, loves.